gonna lie to you, most of this video is gonna be about The Sorrows of Satan, a book that became extremely popular on the Russian book talk, book Instagram for no apparent reason, but I've also managed to squeeze in some other books that I've read this month into this video, so let's talk about it. We're not gonna talk about the hair. It was supposed to be like blood red, turned out like this fuchsia pink, and I've also tried to do face framing kind of strands but didn't like it, so I had to bleach it again, so it's a little bit all over the place, but we will roll with it. First of all, I wanted something that would put me into that autumn mood, that blasted sweater weather that we almost don't get here. We go from short straight into the puffer jacket, I tell ya. So this cover caught my eye. It looked very orangey, very pumpkin-y. It was also about knitting and vampires, so it seemed like the right thing. No, it didn't turn out that well. The Vampire Knitting Club by Nancy Warren is a story of a girl called Lucy who inherits her grandmother's knitting shop, and it turns out that vampires meet there for a knitting club. Lucy, over the course of the story, needs to uncover what actually happened to her grandma with the help of her new supernatural friends. What I really wanted was that full atmosphere, something cute and maybe an engaging main character. Didn't get any of those things. The author rushes through all of this. She wanted to do so much with this story. There is a murder mystery, there's vampires, there's knitting, there is family secrets, hot potential love interest. It's all far too much for the number of pages. I understand that this story is part one of a series, so maybe some of those things will be expanded on in later installments, but this book needs to stand on its own since the plotline, at least for this story, is concluded. The murder mystery is kind of take it or leave it, because the motivation for the murder is clear as day, so we're just waiting for the culprit to reveal himself, so that's not fun. And vampires, I wanted so much from the vampires, because the idea of them meeting for a knitting club is cute. And after Twilight we can do pretty much anything with vampires, but no, I didn't get that either. They're just a window dressing. So disappointing. But really the main problem is the main character. She's just really, really bland. I couldn't tell you a single thing about her beyond her boyfriend having cheated on her and her being lost in life at 27. This is the first-person POV story, so the character work needs to be there. I'm privy to her innermost thoughts, but she doesn't have any. But the worst thing is how she reacts to anything abnormal happening in her life, and there is so much going on. Her grandma's dying, vampires, the meeting for a knitting club, then there is another murder, an attempt on her life, a big family secret revealed, and nothing. She gives us nothing. So if she doesn't care, if she isn't frightened, why should I be? The only thing that this book made me is like, it made me itch to crochet something. This is the last thing, like big thing that I have crocheted last year. And I developed like a pretty severe repetitive strain injury in my shoulder, so I haven't crocheted at all this year. I guess this is your medical advice for the video, kind of watch out for the error size, they are a pain. Keeping with the theme of Halloween, I guess, I've read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? I always get confused which one has the doctorate and which one doesn't. Slightly the similar problem as Frankenstein, as this story is completely taken over by the later iterations and interpretations of these characters, so the story isn't that interesting. It's also very short, I didn't expect that. I can only imagine how this story read when it was first published. It must have had people so excited. About 70% of the text is built on this tension of us, along with the POV character, not understanding what's going on with Jekyll and who the hell is Hyde. But now, you're not likely to go into the story blind, so knowing the twist kind of ruins the story here, because you're simply waiting for the reveal to happen, because nothing particularly exciting happens along the story. Although I kind of chuckled at the introduction of Hyde, where he quite literally kicks a little girl, like kicking the proverbial puppy, to show us how truly evil he is. Most of my enjoyment of the book comes from the last final letter monologue of Jekyll, where he explains what's going on, although I kind of wanted more from it too. I love the creepiness of Hyde taking over even without the serum. This idea that we cannot separate the evil from ourselves, it's simply part of our nature. It's one of those texts that affects literature afterwards, but also is part of public consciousness. We think about these themes, and this was one of the first texts that did it. Although I'm left with the question of what are those pleasures that Jekyll is so ashamed of telling us about, huh? Now let's get into the meat of the video. I think they've done a new translation and thus done a marketing push in the Russian book talk, because all of a sudden this book was everywhere. The Sorrows of Satan by Mary Corelli, written 1895, follows in great tradition of those stories where Satan corrupts some poor sod, and it's actually a commentary on society at large. I like the book well enough. I like these long 19th century novels where they had nothing but time both to write them and to read them, so I rarely find them boring, even if they don't have much going on events-wise. The book has more going on thematically rather than events-wise, so that's what I want to talk about today. But first, it bears mentioning that I enjoyed Corelli's prose well enough. I think they've done well with the translation of it as well, but also I never dozed off, it flowed quite nicely, so that's already a win. Now, to give you an idea of the plot, there is this man called Geoffrey Tempest. He's a failed writer, and he randomly inherits some small fortune from a deceased relative of sorts, and instantly falls into the orbit of a mysterious foreign aristocrat called Lucio, who helps him get settled in the new high society. We can pretty much almost instantly figure out that Lucio is devil himself, and his help comes at a price. So this book has three themes going on, plus an overarching one. The primary one is the corruptibility of men, the effect that money has on them, and the utter sinfulness of the 19th century England society that goes along with it. At times it gets really preachy and really moralizing, but I was mainly on board with it, because we know this, nothing has changed in that regard. Men are easily swayed by money, it destroys them, often strips them of their own morality, so it's something to criticize, even without tying it to religion, and we will talk religion in a second. Our protagonist proclaims that he doesn't believe in God, and that always amuses our devil character. But basically, Geoffrey uses his newfound wealth in the same way that the Ton does, to make himself famous, and basically nothing else, at least nothing of value. From the get-go, he says that since nobody had helped him when he was in need, he won't help anybody either. Okay, fine, a truly good person probably wouldn't have made a deal with the devil in the first place. But Geoffrey has one ambition. He wants to have his book published, the one that everybody had previously refused, but now with the lubrication of £500 per person, all the critics rave about it. And that's actually where the first hiccup comes for him, because nobody reads his book, nobody engages with it kind of honestly, and Geoffrey is only known for his fortune and not his talent. This is nicely juxtaposed with a female writer of the time who doesn't have much success with the critics, but has found her audience, and her stories truly move them. This plot beat actually heavily reminded me of Nikolai Gogol's The Portrait. If you don't have time to read a huge novel, read that short story instead. Although Gogol mostly leans into the nature of art, can it be for sale, or creativity cannot be defined by the masses. Here in this novel, it nicely speaks to the nature of Geoffrey's success and fortune, how it isn't real and it doesn't actually make him happy. Unfortunately, it all falls apart in the end, because Corelli falls into this simplistic belief that money corrupts all without exception, and true honesty and happiness can only be found in poverty. I don't like that. While I do agree that money doesn't guarantee you happiness, poverty doesn't either. And yet, that's quite literally the thesis statement at the end. It's very much black and white, money bad. But I'm obviously missing a big piece of the puzzle here, and that is the renouncement of Satan and acceptance of God in his infinite wisdom. And if you do that, then poverty is not likely to bother you. I don't think that's true, at least for me, but obviously I'm not religious. This theme of money corrupting ties in with another, and that is the scathing critique of literary critics, a rather harsh judgment of them, how they believe themselves to be incorruptible and virtuous while they are just as easily bought off as anybody else. This seems like a personal gripe of Corelli here, or maybe a time period thing. I guess it's true that critics are not always the most honest of people, but I'm much less interested in that, so let's move on. All I've said so far about the corruptibility of man was really only about the man. but Corelli also has things to say about women. This is once again a critique of the 19th century society. The point of contention is that women are not as they used to be, not these virtuous and virginal, no. They read books now, these deplorable books that promote these immoral behaviors and make them all into whores. Gotta love this moral hysteria that if women read books, they will get these ideas, and somehow it always leads to sexual depravity. You can either be a Madonna or a whore, take a pick. And I'm genuinely not even exaggerating. There are two female characters who represent these two sides. First, there's this female author called Mavis that I've mentioned before. She's all sugar and spice and everything nice, and this representation of the virtues for a 19th century woman. Yes, she writes books, how dare she, but she doesn't strive for fame, she doesn't have much in terms of money, but she also has the most important Christian virtue, the virtue of forgiveness. And then there is Sybil, a woman who gives us a full monologue as to how she ended up on her knees before Satan, begging him to fuck her. The claim is that she understood early on that she was a possession for sale because her father needs to marry her off well in order to improve his own financial station. So she constantly refers to marriage as a financial transaction, a purchase and sale of her, which I found interesting as far as the character detail. But then she read those books, those deplorable books that completely distorted her view of love, made her incapable of it, and now she only views love as this carnal pleasure and not this heavenly feeling. She specifically names Swinburne as one of the authors that got her there. I looked him up. I do not know why she went after him specifically. Somebody like Émilie Zola fits more, but okay, fine. So obvious problems here. I was actually on board with Sybil's character. She understood her situation, she was honest in her communication with Geoffrey, who's such a fuckboy, because he is so happy that he can now purchase her, his words not mine, but when she tells him essentially the same thing, he's appalled and aghast at the state of women these days. Fuck you, dude. My thing is, I don't enjoy this moral hysteria around women reading, but it's a product of its time. We've mostly moved on from it, so it's a little bit of a relic. What I don't enjoy is, once again, putting women against each other. How there are these good girls and there are bad ones. And you don't want to be bad now, do you? But really, you cannot win either way, because men are expected to use you just in different ways. One for, like, carnal pleasures, but the other ones, they are supposed to lift men up, guide them, because women are these angel-like figures who need to drag men away from the darkness that they're constantly drawn to. Let's just say straight from the bat, women are not recovery centers for men. That's not how it works. But this is exactly the thesis statement here. I think Lucier says it just like that in his final monologue, so that's not great. And honestly, I'm sort of used to having these types of thoughts for men, but this being friendly fire is kind of awkward. Because I also think that Corelli believes herself to be this Mavis type, exalted and virtuous and kind of high and mighty while condemning other women. I don't enjoy that. And it wouldn't be such a problem had the book not been so moralistic and didactic. I know that Corelli is trying to teach me a lesson here. She's trying to teach me this Christian moral, and my gut just rejects it. But speaking of Christianity, so the sorrows of Satan. So one could argue that it is more about him than the main character, Geoffrey. And there are parts about it that I love. I love this reading of Satan's character where he's not the evil incarnate, but rather Lucifer Morningstar, the fallen angel who's betrayed God and fallen, and he is the first sinner. And I do not know how wide this interpretation is, but Corelli describes it as he cannot return to paradise for as long as we, people, sin. So he helps people in their downfall because he cannot resist a sinner's call, but he also despises us for our sins because we are keeping him from paradise. At the same time, if a person rejects his call and renounces Satan, he lets them be, but also he loves them more because they get him closer to heaven, to his home. I love this internal conflict for him. It gives Lucifer so much more dimension, more than God ever gets. And it's not simply because we love a bad boy, but also it kind of reframes our relationship with temptation and sin. I love that. I don't think that these ideas are necessarily new or groundbreaking. The feeling that I got is that this book is in a conversation with Paradise Lost. I haven't read Paradise Lost. My feeling is it's likely going to be far too religious for me, but here we are. But reframing Lucio as such, as a reluctant tempter, it both helps the narrative but also weakens it. Lucio performs his evil deed to enable Geoffrey, but nothing that they do is actually that bad. Lucio might be the softest devil we've encountered in literature ever. Their evil deeds are not that bad, like light machinations, a little bit bribing, a little gambling. But to be fair, Geoffrey doesn't do anything good either. Very neutral evil of them. I don't want to spoil the ending for you here, I don't do it here, but nothing about Geoffrey warrants what happens to him in the end. Quite literally takes for Lucio to reveal himself to him and show him God, for Geoffrey to even understand who Lucio is and to renounce him. There is no build-up from Geoffrey up to this point, it's a click of a switch. And it's not satisfying narratively. And I want to stress this narratively because if you're trying to teach me a moralistic lesson about Christianity, it works, but it does not make for satisfying ending to a book. So I've said that I do not want to spoil the ending for you, but I've come up with this joke and I love it far too much. So just like light spoilers, I guess. But the book ends the same way that the movie Devil Wears Prada does. And they both have devil and Satan in their title. Ooh. But overall, it's a fine book for the 19th century, but at the same time, if you've never heard of it, it's probably right. Maybe we should leave it there, where it's sat. Not completely forgotten, but not talked about either. So next I was in the mood for something with a false spleen, and nobody does soft depression better than the French. I thought about going back to Françoise Sagan. I've read a lot of hers, like in my early 20s, but then I looked at my bookshelf and I have a lot of Anna Gavalda books on there, and I have not read a single one of them, so I've decided to rectify that situation. I picked this one. I wish somebody was waiting for me somewhere, I guess. Coincidentally, it's also the first one that she's ever published. It's a series of short stories. I'm warming up to them. And somebody's drilling a hole. Can you hear it? Can you hear it drilling? I'm sorry. Gavalda has this style of writing that's really light and really fun. It's as if a friend is telling you a story. It's witty, it's quirky, it's a little bit mundane, but in a good sense, like regular stories from regular people. I love the first one about a girl going on a disappointing date with a man she'd met on the street. It's fun. The stories vary. The French rarely pull their punches, so it can go from a story about a man who simply wants to bang his co-worker to a really disturbing story about sexual assault, so watch out. But they all feel very real. Because these stories are written in a very light-hearted way, they kind of pull you in, and so you feel this emotionality in them, you are always engaged. Gavalda also has this sense of humor and enough self-awareness, I guess, because it ends with a story that reads really autobiographically about an author's first callback from a publisher when they're trying to get their book published. It's fun. And this good-natured teasing is really fun to read, so I do recommend that you check them out. I cannot say that I loved all of these stories, but some of them are really, really good, and all of them are nice, at the very least. I have at least 2 other books by Gavalda here on the bookshelves. Ensemble c'est tout looks as thick as Emma here, but to be fair, Emma has this eye-wateringly small script on it, so yeah, there is that. And I forgot to turn on my pumpkin garland on. Let's do that now. I also read a Russian book called Saspyga. I cannot spend too much time talking about it because I don't think it's translated into English, but I want to mention it because it delivered on what I wanted from this spooky season of October. The story is about 2 girls who get lost in the Altai Mountains after a horse riding trip. And then they start to realize that the reality begins to shift, and they've ended up in the land of the dead. And there is this mythical creature called Saspyga that people are trying to hunt. But at the same time, the story is about the human experience, what we're willing or not willing to do, where our limits are, and how to stay human even in the direst of circumstances. I don't know if anybody still translates Russian contemporary books, but if it ever becomes available, you should check it out. I've also attempted Marc Levy's latest, and apparently Marc Levy does political and societal commentary now. Because the plot that I've grasped from like a quarter of the book that I've finished is about a guy who goes to prison for running a shop of banned books because politicians ban books now. And another plot line is about a murderer politician, I guess. So look, I wanted some light audiobook to put on in the background while I was editing a video about cars for a friend of mine. Didn't get that. But also it coincided with a moment in time where I had to download a Russian book from a very sketchy pirate website because it was banned and out of print. And another book that I tried to read looked like this. So yeah, when people from the first world start complaining about totalitarian state and censorship, well, first of all, my country is an authoritarian state with real censorship. If I ever go to prison for the books that I read, send me a postcard. But my country is not even the worst one out there. And still, my knee-jerk reaction is like, my culture is not your costume. Which does not reflect well on me, or Marc Levy for that matter. I will probably eventually finish that book, but is that what Marc Levy does now? I remember him for the whimsical, slightly magical romantic novels. What happened to that? And a rather disappointing end to this month's reading is Tea with Ghosts by Chris Vuklisevic. Weirdly, I don't think it's available in English. I've seen it's written in French. I've seen it in German, I think Spanish, some other Scandinavian languages, and Russian. But to be fair, you're not missing much. I wanted something spooky, something magical, or at the very least some tea with ghosts, and didn't get much of that. It's a story of two twin sisters, one of whom can talk to ghosts, the other one is a witch, and they need to discover a family secret about their mother. At first, the book is very slow, giving us backstories, trying to build atmosphere, and then it randomly just vomits a lot of background and backstory onto the mother, which at the first glance is very dazzling, but when you think about it for like 2 seconds, it doesn't make any sense. And worst of all, it's not giving satisfying resolutions to the sisters, one of whom is deeply, deeply mistreated by their mother, abused really, and when she learns the reason why, which doesn't make much sense to begin with, she just shrugs it off. Yeah, it's not a good book. So yeah, not a particularly exciting month book-wise. I think next one is going to be better because I've just learned that Fredrik Backman has a new book out, so that's going to the top of the list because I don't think I've ever read anything from Fredrik Backman that I didn't enjoy. Well, I didn't particularly enjoy Beartown, but that's simply because of the subject matter. I was just like, I cannot handle it right now. So I'm looking forward to that. See you then. I don't think that I've loved all... Oh, she scared me. Fuck me. Если нужна помощь, дайте знать. Алиса меня напугала.